Hey guys, welcome into the Bear With Us podcast. I'm Jack. He is Frank. This week we are going to talk a little rookie wide receiver class, a little rookie tight end class. But first, before we do that, Frank and I wanted to talk a little bit about the Jalen Carter. I don't want to call it news, Frank, but maybe report is probably the best way to put it. The Bears have met with Jalen Carter for the second time as teams continue to do their homework, their due diligence on him, just to really make sure they know exactly what kind of prospect he really is, both in the football sense as well as the person. And Frank, I thought it was kind of interesting that Drew Rosenhaus, who's the agent for Jalen Carter, declined interviews for teams outside of the top 10. You and I thought he might fall a little bit farther than 9. They don't seem to believe that. What do you think about the strategy of just declining offers outside of the top 10?
That to me feels like agent savviness or maybe even like neglect if you look at it the opposite way. Or like malpractice, if maybe is a strong word, but like I think they're pushing all their chips in and saying like, no, we're going to build his value because, and even if it's not true, maybe you get people who are outside the top 10 that if these top 10 teams aren't, going to draft him, they're going to want to trade up. But again, that's sort of, I feel like it's a weird, like double-edged sword type of thing, because if you're not letting them interview him, they may not, the character concerns or what have you, they're not going to be able to be answered. But it feels very much like we're putting all our chips in the center. I'm getting my prospect at the top 10 one way or another.
Well, I thought it was kind of weird that, like, to say, well, we're not going to talk to teams outside of the top 10 because we feel he's going to go in the top 10. I mean, that's fine, but, like, what about, so you're a team, like you were saying, who wants to trade up maybe for, like, you're not going to talk to the Titans at 11? Who may trade up with the Bears to get you. Like, I don't really understand the strategy. I understand not talking to a team in like the late 20s, late 20s, 30s, fine. But like, why not talk to teams that might trade up for you? I guess I don't quite understand that.
Yeah, well, that's why I said it's like, I think I understand the logic of it being like, this is our value. This is where we're going to go. But again, that would make sense if the character concerns weren't there. If he crushed his pro day, if the legal things or the I don't even know which, not necessarily legal stuff, but just everything that's been surrounding Jalen Carter the last couple of months, if that wasn't there, I think it would make more sense. But at this point, you'd think he'd be a little more open. But then again, that's what makes me feel like this is like this agent sort of thing going on where it's like, no, even with all this, my guy's still top 10. That's who we're honing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It does feel strange.
Well, and there is something I do want to clarify real quick, because Adam Schefter's tweet was a little confusing. Jalen Carter visited the Bears on April the 3rd for the first time. It was his second visit, having visited the Eagles as well. So he made it sound like this is why I don't follow Adam Schefter. I'm going to be honest with you, Frank. I haven't followed him since all the stuff happened with Dwayne Haskins. And the way he
what a fucking ugly.
Yeah, I was like, man, forget it. I don't need to follow you anymore. But before, not to get into all of that, of course. But on the Bears side of things, Frank, what do you think this visit means? Do you think it's maybe a sign that there is some legitimate interest on the Bears side, or do you think it's just Ryan Poles just doing his homework?
No, I mean, there still has to be legitimate interest in him. I think this is, because just take the player, take the talent. He's a perfect fit for what Matt Eberflus wants to do. He's talked about how important that position is to this defense. He's talked about wanting to build the interior defensive line. And when you talk about prototypes, it doesn't get better than what Jalen Carter is, not only just to the Bears. I mean, that type, that's like, he has the potential to be Aaron Donald, Warren Sapp, like that type of impact from an interior defensive lineman. Any team needs that. Every team needs that. So from that standpoint, you have to do your homework. And from the perfect fit standpoint, you absolutely have to be certain that if we're going to take this guy off of our board, or it's just like if we trade down in the teens and he's still there, then maybe you have to, like turn over every single stone. And that's what I think that they're doing. What I don't want them to do, though, because I do think he's a perfect fit, trait-wise, player-wise, position-wise, I don't want them to ignore any sort of red flags in these interviews of like chalking it up as like, we can work with that. Oh, maybe he's a little immature. Maybe it won't be great for the locker room, but he's such a good player. Like, we have to take him. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And again, it feels like another almost double-edged sword, because I feel like you want to meet with him to make sure that you turn over every stone, but then the more you meet with him, that gives you more opportunities to sort of be like, I can brush it under the rug, or I can. So I guess what I'm saying is I really hope that Eberflus and Poles have more of a, for lack of a better word, like strict demeanor, where it's like, for instance, like if I'm asking you a question, I'm not giving you the answer that I want to hear. You know what I mean? Like within the question, because I need you to tell me absolutely what I need to hear, but I need it to come from you. Do you get what I'm saying? Like that, to me, things like that. I'm thinking of like interviewing candidates for different jobs and thinking of like, I need to hear this from you without anyone else giving you that answer. And if you can give me that, that will alleviate any worry or a worry that I had about you. But yeah, I mean, there has to be legitimate interest. I'm certainly not going to take back, and I don't think you are either. Like if we do wind up drafting him, I'm not going to take back the way I felt. I still wouldn't do it. But that to me just means he answered all of their questions, and the red flags that they may have had going into these interviews, he was able to absolve.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the first pick that really establishes how Ryan Poles is, and Matt Eberflus as well, are really looking to build this team. More so than any of the picks last year is kind of just a transition period, obviously. But this draft will really set the tone for how they're looking to build this team for the future. And I think there's a lot of gamesmanship to it. That seems to be the case with Ryan Poles. I saw some people talking the last few weeks about how they don't like how Ryan Poles is so transparent and honest about sort of where he's at currently. They think he's maybe giving away a little too much and feels a little too much like a first-time GM, a young GM. I don't necessarily agree with that. We had last week, we were talking about Jalen Carter a lot, obviously, and Ryan Poles basically saying, I think we could handle it possibly with the locker room we have, but I'm not sure if we're really there yet to have that type of personality, if in fact that is how Jalen Carter is. I think there is some gamesmanship here, and we were talking about it right before we started recording, but Ryan Poles might be getting it out there that he's talking with Jalen Carter to convince some teams. Jalen Carter makes it to 9. We'll take some phone calls. We'll trade back one more time. Why not? There's a lot of holes on this team, Frank. We talked about this a ton. I do think there is some genuine interest in the position, in the player. Of course, there should be. He was talked about as possibly going number 1 overall when they had originally had the first pick. So if they could potentially get the player at 9, that's huge. It just depends on the person, and also, again, I think there's some gamesmanship to maybe get another offer to trade back a little bit more if they feel there's some prospects still available.
Yeah, no, he's been playing those types of games.
With, I should say.
Right, of course. But he's been playing those types of games even when when the Bears had the number 1 pick, and he was doing the whole, I know for sure I can get a 25 first. I know for sure I can get. It's astonishing to me that people hated Ryan Pace because he only spoke once a year. And now we have a GM who is very forthright, who is very upfront, who is very honest. That to me is amazing. That was the one thing. We're Cubs fans, Jack. Like that's what I loved about Theo Epstein. He didn't play this mysterious bullshit. I'm like, especially in football, it seems like there's this weird thing that franchises start to do of like this competitive advantage. We can't like give away the competitive advantage. There is none. Like again, like when you take away that allure, and you think about like the owners meetings and when people get together and the coaches get together, you think these guys aren't talking to each other? Like,
right.
That's asinine. Again, like this is a loose comparison, but we all play. Well, not we all. I don't know if anyone people listening, but me and you play dynasty football. We're in the same league. We've been in the same division. We're still talking about trades that we're actively a part of. Like other people are also coming to us. Hey, what do you think about this one? What do you think about that? And it's like that just naturally happens when you're in charge of a team. You're going to make connections with people. You're going to get people's opinions. Like, can people be nefarious and give you the wrong opinion or differing opinion to like throw you off your game? Sure. But again, like this isn't their life. This is their job. You know what I mean? So when people have that weird, like, oh, like he's talking too much, that's not how, like, it's not how it works. Like everyone knows the holes on the Bears. Everyone knows the holes of different teams, like the possibility of them drafting people, trading for people, signing people. Like this isn't a big fucking secret. Like we know this. If me and you, who have zero inside or inside knowledge of things, know that it's a possibility that the Bears can draft Jalen Carter, you don't think everyone else in the fucking league with inside knowledge knows this? Like, come on. Like people just get so uptight about this shit, and it's so weird. Like I'm thinking about it from an entertainment standpoint. I'm thinking about it from a fan who likes to be in the know as much as possible without actually knowing coaches and having access to beat reporters. That's awesome to have a GM who's talking to us. I would take a fucking podcast from him, to be honest with you. Give us a bi-weekly podcast. But, you know, like, I don't know, people get weird with stuff like that. And it's honestly annoying because we've seen the total contrast to that. And then it's probably the same people who are upset that Ryan Pace never spoke out, you know, ever.
Right. No, I think there's a lot of benefits to Ryan Poles, and I think he's, you know, we heard a lot about how smart he was, how smart the Bears thought he was, and how good they think he can be at this. I think we've kind of seen that, just in the sense of how many decisions he's made that have just really kind of made sense. I mean, almost everything you and I have called for, he's pretty much done. Not saying that he's listening to the podcast. I mean, of course he is. That doesn't need to be said. But I mean, like, we didn't want him to sign Roquan Smith, traded him. Didn't want him to keep Khalil Mack, traded him. Traded Robert Quinn, made a lot of sense. What did he do in the offseason? During the season, what we need, get Justin Fields help, get him weapons, trades for Chase Claypool. Granted, enough has been talked about that. In the offseason, we think you should trades back and gets future capital and a potential wide receiver one for Justin Fields, building around the guy that we want him to build around. Signs some really good linebackers that make a lot of sense for this defense. I just like some of the things Ryan Poles is doing. A lot of it makes sense. And I think this draft is really going to determine how we feel about Ryan Poles' drafting ability, because I think that's arguably the biggest question I have about him at this point. I like how he values contracts. That's number one. He had a lot of money to spend, and one thing I said before the free agency started was don't expect him to just go crazy, because that just didn't seem like the type of person he was, and he really didn't. He went for value. He went for things that made sense on his end. He wants to build this thing for the future, not just for one shot at a ring and see what happens. So I guess drafting is probably the biggest question I have. And what they do at the 9 pick, whether it's trading back again, whether it's drafting Jalen Carter, whether it's drafting one of the cornerbacks, whether it's drafting an offensive tackle, I think it's really going to determine how I view Ryan Poles' drafting ability moving forward, because the last draft wasn't great. It wasn't perfect, but I think there's a lot more good to it than there was bad. I mean, you look at some of the progress that those second round picks made. Obviously, they feel like Braxton Jones can be a starter at left tackle. That's very clear throughout free agency. I think there's a lot of positives to that draft, and we'll see how he continues that pace moving forward. Was there anything else you wanted to say about the whole Jalen Carter visit?
No, but I want to like survey the landscape, because a lot of people feel the way that we do. And I think people are going to tell on themselves that are just sort of going with the flow and, like, you know, don't want to stir the pot, if you will. But if people start to switch up if the Bears draft Jalen Carter, it's going to tell me a lot about Bears Twitter. Because again, it's not the talent for me. I don't think the Bears have built enough to get someone in who may not be the best for a locker room, for a team, for off the field issues. Because I think it's more maturity than anything else, to be honest with you. And I don't know if they've cultivated, that space yet. If this was next year's draft and coming off a 7-8 win type of year with, a little bit more culture to the team, I think you take that chance. I don't think you can. And that's where I stand on it. And I just know, because I've seen it already. I've seen people, switch things up after they've given an opinion, and all of a sudden, Poles does something differently than what they wanted him to do. They're like, "Oh, this is fucking great." So you were just saying yesterday that it would be the worst day of your life if this happened. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on, to be honest with you. I'm feeling a little petty.
Yeah, I think that's more than deserved, and I know you like to be Mr. Petty, Mr. Frank Petty, not Tom Petty. He's dead. Mr. Frank Petty, his long lost brother. Frank, I did want to touch on some related Bears free agency news. Nothing major, but the Bears did re-sign Nathan Peterman for some reason. Maybe they think, you know what? Maybe we need to go get the number 1 pick next year. All right, maybe we need to be careful, get Caleb Williams or get in position to get that pick, and then so they bring out the Peterman. The Colts signed free agent running back Darrington Evans, so he is obviously not going to be back with the Bears. Not really a surprise there. And then Trevor Siemian is talking with the Cincinnati Bengals to potentially be the backup quarterback for Joe Burrow. One thing I thought was weird is like how much attention the Trevor Siemian signing has gotten recently. It's people talk about. I think he's probably going to be a coach at some point, Frank. It really sounds like he's going to go like the Mike Kafka route eventually. But like people love him. It's very interesting, and I think you said it perfectly last week when we were talking about PJ Walker. And basically, Trevor Siemian is a good guy to have to really help Justin learn the offense. In terms of playing ability, maybe they just wanted something a little bit different. So again, nothing major, but some news there. Frank, did you have anything before we get into our rankings of the rookie wide receivers, rookie tight ends, anything?
No, nothing as it relates to what we were saying. Before we dive in, though, I'll say as I scouted these players, I'm impressed with Ryan Poles, man. I am, because he knew that the Bears still needed a playmaker at receiver. I don't think any of these guys are it. That doesn't mean we don't draft one in like the 3rd or 4th round, because I think some of these guys in my top 8 are probably going to be there around that range. There's probably going to be like 1 or 2 first-round picks at receiver. And none of these guys are close to DJ Moore. So for him to pull what he did to get the support and add even more draft picks, he clearly, I think he knows what he's doing. So that made me very, very happy.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think it's interesting, Frank. I haven't felt this way about a rookie class in a while.
Yeah. Since the N'Keal Harry draft, right? Like that was the last time that I was like this blah about a draft class.
I think there's some good. I think there's better players at the top, but the depth is kind of like But I do feel like almost pretty much anywhere one of these players go, it's really going to depend on team and scheme fit and who else is across from them.
Yeah.
Much unlike last year where it was like, all right, Garrett Wilson was my number 1. He could go anywhere and be a superstar. Like that was how I felt. He went to the Jets. I didn't feel great about that. But even with the terrible quarterback play, obviously he proved to be a very good player already. Chris Olave was, I think, my number 3. And he was great in New Orleans, but I don't know if that would have happened if he was maybe lining up with other in Philadelphia or something like that.
Right.
Drake London, if any of these guys go to Atlanta, Frank, I'm not going to feel good. I'm really not going to feel good about any of these guys going to Atlanta because I just don't think they know what they're doing there. But let's start with the wide receivers. I know that you mentioned that you had quite a few. I think you did 10. Is that correct?
I did 10, but the last 2 were more like notations because I sort of, this is the first time I had to do this with the receiver class. in a very long time. I did the same thing I did with running backs. I was sort of scouting. I was like, okay, these guys they're distinguishing themselves. They look like NFL guys. I got to about 8 or 9, and I was like, okay, here's where it starts to feel like all of them are the same. So you may even have a different like back half of the list for me. I had some others jotted down that like you could put them at like 8, 9, 10-ish, but it also started to be blah from there. How do you? So well, let me just say that the last two for me, and I'll give you my quick notations on them because I don't have to take a deep dive. And if you have them elsewhere, you can do that. But Kayshon Boutte and Rashee Rice were the two that I was just like, like I wanted to make sure I put footnotes on. I thought Rice was a very strange watch for me because it was very clear that he was very physically talented, but it was like something was missing, almost to a point where like I wanted to know like when did you start playing football? Like sometimes he looked a little bit lost. He didn't always finish his routes. But his physical traits were just like off. That like there were certain highlights where I'm like, holy shit! Like why can't he do this more consistently? Like it's very clear he's a good athlete. And then, I mean, I the reason why I had Kayshon is because I keep seeing people like he's gonna be the steal of the draft, but it's like I read like bios about him and I'm watching his tape and I'm like, what are people seeing that like he has solid tape, but then you see everything around it where it's like he's just skipping, he missed a year, and I don't know. It just seemed he had a lot of red flags for me. But I want to make sure that I notated him. He didn't really make the top 10, but those are the last two that I jotted down because I see the talent, but it just seems like people were almost, I don't know, maybe like highlight culture took over and people were like, yeah, look at this great play. He'd be fucking phenomenal. But then when you really watch their tape, both of them felt like just things were missing. But I've seen them go pretty high in mock drafts. I don't know if those two made your list at all, if we had any notations on them, but I wanted to make sure I touched on those before we got into the actual list.
People love these two guys. I think a big part of it was he went to LSU, right? And he was like the number one wide receiver there. And, you've seen kind of guys coming out of there like Jamar Chase, obviously, Justin Jefferson. Honestly, Frank, he kind of just reminds me of Terrace Marshall, like 2.0 in terms of the hype that's there. And that being said, Terrace Marshall, I thought, played a lot better last year and might actually be able to carve a rollout for himself in this Panthers offense this upcoming season. We'll see, but like people kind of just assume because he was an LSU Tiger, he was just going to be the next big thing. And I think scouts have kind of been like, he doesn't really do anything that's all that special. Yeah. There was some character stuff with him as well. And then Rashee Rice, he was an SMU guy, so a lot of people were comparing him to Danny Gray, who went to the 49ers. I think it was like the third round last year. And they thought that Danny Gray was a better prospect than Rashee Rice. So, I again, it's kind of like, I know we're talking about the bottom. We're not even towards the top, but like, as we're talking through this, I'm kind of comparing what I had ranking-wise versus like what Fantasy Pros has their rookie rankings as. And like they have these two guys as wide receiver 7 and wide receiver 8.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's just
But Jack, that's what made me feel sort of blah about this draft because my number 10 last year was Christian Watson. And it was only because I thought he was a boom or bust type of prospect where it's like he's so physically talented, but he's like he seemed to lose focus a lot. I mean, he had his cons, right? He has the sort of red flags as a player, but like you saw it with him still. And we saw him play really good last year in spurts. I don't even think that like my 9 and 10 or I don't remember who I had 9 last year, but I felt 1 through 10 could have all gone in the first and like mid-second rounds. And they damn near all did. Like our whole top 10 went before day 2 was over with. And yeah, I don't feel this way about this draft. Some of these guys in this top 8 may be like 4th rounders.
I felt good about last year. I did way better about last year. And it's a tough draft to really need a lot in. Like you think of like Jahan Dotson. Like Jahan Dotson would probably be my number 3, number 2.
He would probably be my number 2 or 3. Yeah.
Like you think, I mean, just look at these names last year: Drake London, Jameson Williams, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, Sky Moore, Jahan Dotson, Christian Watson, George Pickens, Alec Pierce. Like last year's was really fucking good, man. That's why you and I were screaming to the heavens for Ryan Poles to draft us a fucking wide receiver, because who knows what's going to come next. And unfortunately, unless you're at sort of the top, and granted, Ryan Poles might trade back into the teens and get one of these guys. It's still very possible. I still think it could happen. Frank disagrees.
Because I just think a lot of these guys are going to be available in the second and third. I don't even think you take a shot on.
Let's go through 6 through 10. Who is your 6 through 10, and we'll see if we have a little bit different.
I'll do 6, 7, and 8, because again, like once I got to Rashee and Kayshawn, they sort of felt the same as essentially everyone else from the list that I was pulling from. 8 for me was Josh Downs. 7 for me was Jonathan Mingo. 6, Jalin Hyatt. Quick tidbits on all. I thought, to be quite honest with you, I thought Downs was like the best pure athlete. Like I don't know if he has it together route tree wise, but he had this like Kadarius Toney type of, like when you get the ball in his hands, like he is very explosive. And I saw a couple of like Debo, but Debo was like, when you get the ball in his hands, he's a fucking running back, versus like Downs and like that Toney type of mold is more of like, quick twitch type of thing. And he had that to him. Mingo, let me say this too, that there were a few guys that felt like old school receivers to me. Like there was a couple possession receivers in here. Mingo being one of them. He reminded me a lot of Moose Muhammad. Just like nothing really stood out, but he always seemed to be like he knew where to sit in his zone. Very good hands. Again, nothing special, but you would just sort of like, watch the tape from a game and nothing looked great. And you look up and it's like, 7 catches for 95 yards and a touch. I'm like, yeah, it was a better game than you would have thought just by looking at it. And he had like that sort of very consistent type of film that I enjoyed. And then Jalin Hyatt for me, he may be actually like the biggest boom or bust on my list. I mean, you talk about fucking speed. He may be the fastest straight line guy here. But he had more of like a Will Fuller type of thing, where like the intermediary stuff was still there, but the route tree may hold him back from what he can really be. Like I don't think any of these dudes that I named are like wide receiver ones, but I think they can be really good complementary pieces if you have an actual X on the opposite side of them. But again, 6 through 8, those might be 4th rounders. Like they like their tape didn't like jump out at me. I know Hyatt had a pretty good what was it, a private workout pro day that I was reading about that people were pretty impressed with, that may bring him up. But again, like, yeah, it was nothing like, the Bears would need this type of guy. I mean, like I look at like even someone who could fit what they're doing would be like a Hyatt guy, but like, is he better than Darnell? Darnell can stretch the field, I think, just as well,
Here's the thing with Jalin Hyatt. He ran what was it, like a 4.4? It's hard for me not to think a team will buy into that speed and and just trade up for him. And yeah, he's probably going to be a deep shot specialist, but the NFL, when it comes to the NFL draft, they fucking love those speed guys. John Ross, Tavon Austin, like those guys just get drafted so high. And not for nothing, Jalin Hyatt put together one hell of a season. I believe he won the best receiver in college last year. Like he was really fucking good. And I'm not going to lie to you, Frank, Bears need speed. I know the joke obviously would be if they did draft Jalin Hyatt, that you're drafting back-to-back Tennessee wide receivers based off of just speed. But obviously I think Jalin Hyatt is just a little bit better of a prospect than Velus. Yes.
I mean, we didn't even scout. We didn't even fucking scout Velus Jones last year.
Didn't even know the name, Frank. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you. But no, very similar. 6 through 8. I had the only difference being I take out Mingo and put in Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State. I do have a slight bias towards Iowa State. My brother went there, so I'm going to be full disclosure. But that's why I had Breece Hall as my number 1 running back last year when all the talk was going to Ken Walker. But Xavier Hutchinson is going to be slept on a little bit, Frank, and I think he could be I know you're listening to me right now and you're like, I've been burned by Iowa State receivers in the past. All right. But Xavier Hutchinson is definitely a little bit better. Doesn't have the best speed, and is going to get into a lot of contested catches, but he usually wins those. So if you need a contested catch guy, he's going to be your option. So I'm curious. Again, I think for him it will depend on where he goes team wise, but I really like Xavier Hutchinson. So keep that name in mind.
He was one that I saw. It was him. There was another jump ball guy that I did not rank that I liked as well. Let me pull up my notes. But I agree with you. But again, it came to a point where it's like I can see Xavier Hutchinson going in the third, just like I can see everyone else or fourth, just like everyone else that that I could have listed from like maybe 6 to 15. You know what I mean? Like it's that none of these guys started to really separate themselves. Are we going? Want to do 4 and 5 really quick?
Yeah, we'll do 4 and 5.
Perfect. 5 for me was Zay Flowers. 4 for me was Cedric Tillman, the opposite receiver of Jalen Hyatt in college. Zay Flowers, it was really weird. I was going into his tape expecting him to be more of a Deebo Samuel type of prospect because I saw the comparisons nonstop on Twitter. I didn't see that at all. When I watched him play, he was more of like a slippery slot type of dude. He reminded me a lot of like Julian Edelman, that type of like super, like it's very clear to me he has a very high IQ. You talk about like sitting in zones or, just there were certain plays where it looked like they were option routes and he just absolutely read where a linebacker was going to be and went the opposite way and got wide open. Like it was a lot of that type of things. I think if you pair him with like a really high IQ quarterback, you would see him make him and that quarterback duo be one of those like underrated, like maybe he may not get like 1,400 yards, but just like a 900,000 yard, just like 4 or 5 years in a row where you're just like very consistent. I really liked his film. He was exciting to watch. And Cedric Tillman, dude, I swear to I couldn't shake this comparison in my head from the very first clip that I saw. I was like, this dude is Cortland Sutton from like the size, like the way he played, even some of the cons that I was looking at, like, oh, like he's a body catcher coming out of college. And he looked very much like that sort of play style, to a point where I think he has one of the higher floors in this draft. I was sort of watching his route running. It's not super impressive, but he was able to use his size when he needed to. The 50-50 balls I thought he was really, really good at. But again, there sort of becomes a trade-off for me with the bigger guys where it's like I don't expect them to have the quickest feet. I expect them to know how to get to a spot and like win a jump ball. You know what I mean? Like it's not like separation and all that sort of it isn't the biggest deal. Like I thought that way of Drake London last year, and he was my number one. It's like he didn't separate that much, but he knew how to go up and get the fucking football. Like that's what I need from my big guys. I don't think Cedric is that. I think he's sort of a tier down from that type of prospect. But yeah, those are my 4 and 5.
Cedric Tillman was my number 9. Full disclosure.
Okay, nice.
I really liked him though. You said Cortland Sutton, which I know a lot of our listeners are going to hear that and be like, oh God, here we go again with Frank and his love affair with Cortland Sutton.
I love Cortland Sutton.
I saw Michael Pittman, if I'm going to be completely honest with you.
Well, I compared Pittman to Sutton too. Do you remember when we did that? Yep.
I do. So I'm on board with you there. I had as my 4 and 5. I had Marvin Mims out of Oklahoma as my number 5. I think he's a guy that's going to be really slept on, but who could end up being really, really good. He just didn't have the quarterback play to really show what he could do this year, but past couple of years when he had the big, when Caleb Williams was there, he was really productive. So I think that could translate. People are falling in love with him all over again. It's pretty interesting. Zay Flowers, not my number 4. I absolutely love Zay Flowers. I agree basically with everything you said about him. Going to be a really, really good target in the slot. And yeah, I don't really understand the comparison that you had said other people were giving him. But I mean, man, the guy caught 12 touchdowns last year, like playing at Boston College. And the way he did it too wasn't just your typical catch the ball in the middle of the field and run away and run real fast. Like he was also making some contested catches for a guy his size. Was a little more impressive to me than Josh Downs. Like they're both kind of similar in size, but for some reason I couldn't stop saying Josh Downs looked smaller, played smaller than Zay Flowers did. So I thought that was really interesting. How do you want to do? You want to do 3, 2, 1, and then go from there?
We'll go. Yeah, we'll go one by one because this one's gonna piss you off. My number 3, I had Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Oh yeah, we're fighting in the parking lot. Yeah, you're right.
I know.
Yep. I'm coming over.
Sorry.
We're fighting.
You know what? I think I went in with a bias because a lot of people, mocked him to the Bears at 9, or if they traded back to the teens. And the comparison was like, oh, he might be able to give you what Ja'Marr Chase get. And I even said this last week. This is before I scouted. I was like, if the Bears feel that way, you might get a little zesty and take him at 9. I don't think he's a first round pick, Jack. I like my worry for him is he had some of the better film of the rest of these prospects, but he didn't present like the explosiveness that I was expecting to see. So again, I went in this year's draft hearing the rumblings a little bit more than I usually do. I think it's because I'm like following more people with, scouting in Dynasty and such on Twitter. But he reminded me more of like an Earl Bennett type, like slot guy, not necessarily outside. Maybe you can move him a little bit, but more possession, more, maybe a little bit more explosive than an Earl Bennett. But that's like, that was what I got from him. Really good route running, sharp route running, good hands, but nothing like screamed wide receiver 1 to me to even consider him at number 9. Maybe the late first, early second, I think is more fitting for him. But yeah, I don't know. I was because I didn't see him all year. Like I don't watch college football. I was expecting to see like, you're talking about number 9 overall. Like, am I going to get some Ja'Marr Chase type of stuff in here? Am I going to get Drake London type of film? Granted, he's not that type of size, but like Antonio Brown feel. Like I didn't get any of the super, like jump off of the screen film.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't see it, I'm not going to argue with you. It's a lot of personal preference in terms of what you're looking for. I had Quentin Johnston as my number 3. I'm going to be honest with you. He's an interesting player. Obviously, the physical traits is really what stands out about him. I didn't run a 40, didn't really do a whole lot at the combine, but he's a weird mix. Like I feel like his ceiling is like Alshon. Like I see a lot of Alshon, but then his floor is every other tall guy, big physical guy who just ends up not being good. Right? Like that. Like that's his floor. He reminds me a lot of Kevin White in the way that people talk about him in terms of just like, yeah, he dominated the Big 12, but can't really run a route tree. And ever since then, I don't trust guys like this. There were still a lot of things that I liked. Like I thought he was very good about how he used his size and speed. It did really stand out. But like there were games where he'd just do nothing and just like didn't catch a lot of touchdowns. And I don't know, man. Like I part of me likes him, but the other part of me couldn't put him any higher than 3. I still think he's better than I could see, actually. I guess I shouldn't say that. I could see guys like Zay Flowers, Jalen Hyatt end up having better careers than Quentin Johnston, but I could also see a scenario where he actually ends up being the best wide receiver in this draft class. So he's a little strange for me, but that's why I put him at 3.
Yeah, I don't totally disagree with that synopsis. My number 2 was Jordan Addison. A little bit limited of a route tree, but I mean, I saw like Brandon Cooks, Deshaun Jackson, like that explosive deep threat that's like you can take anything to the house. I don't know if he did any punt returning or kick returning. I would assume with just the way his speed was that he got that at some level, but I could see that being, an immediate contributor as well. Now you're talking about if the Bears are interested in a burner, that's who I would be interested in. Versus fucking Hyatt. I would take Addison in the second round 100%. I think he would present that sort of deep threat that would really stretch the field. But yeah, it's the worry there is, I mean, sort of my worry that I have with a good amount of these guys, if not all of them, except for my number 1. I don't think he'll ever be a wide receiver 1. Like you're going to need, DeAndre Hopkins on the opposite side of him, just someone with, that can attack multiple facets of a defense. But the thing is, there's a certain thing that even if you're not a number one, that you're going to make defenses account for you because you take the top off so well. He was that guy for me in this draft. Like, he may have games where it's like 2 targets, 1 catch for, 25 yards, but everyone else around him absolutely ate because he just kept taking that safety off of the field. You know what I mean? Like, it was nothing but go routes. But no, I did really enjoy I really enjoyed his film. I think I think because of his play style as well, I think he has a pretty high floor in the NFL. I don't know how well it's going to translate fantasy wise though.
Yeah, again, I think fantasy wise will definitely depend a lot on where these guys go. I don't think there's a single player, like running back included, where it's just going to be team independent and they'll be great.
Yeah.
I think like a lot of this is going to depend on where they go, who their quarterback is, all that stuff. My number 2 was Smith-Njigba, so number 1 being Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison has been my number 1 all offseason, all during college football. I just fell in love with him, and I can't shake it. There are some things I do agree with you about Smith-Njigba. The weird thing, though, Frank, is Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Granted, it's their teammate. They played with him. Probably trying to hype him up for the draft, get him drafted a little bit higher. I understand that. But to me, it's very rare where teammates will just constantly say the same thing, especially 2 of them. They kept saying that he was the best one out of all of them. Like, Garrett Wilson said multiple times, like, Smith-Njigba was the best out of all of them, which kind of makes me, like, hesitate a little bit to knock him too much. He missed, obviously, just a ton of time last year, which makes this really difficult to really kind of get a good feel, because you're looking at tape from a year ago where he was basically the 3rd option behind guys who went, 10 and 12 in the draft. Like, that's, to me, I think he's going to be a very good player. I don't know if he'll be great. I saw some comparisons to Jarvis Landry, so like that type of slot receiver, which Jarvis Landry was super productive in New Orleans, so that wouldn't be a bad thing. But I agree with you. I don't know if I necessarily see Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave type production. Depends where he goes, though. Depends. It really does. If he went to like the Eagles and he was the wide receiver 3 behind AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, it's a pretty good 3 right there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if he goes to like the Packers, it's like him and Christian Watson, I don't know how well that's really going to work.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I couldn't shake me just feeling like he couldn't play on the outside. Like, I think he's a legitimate slot guy. Mm-hmm. That just seems to be, I don't know if it's just like a lack of explosiveness or maybe that's just the role that sometimes this is the case, because the thing is, again, route running, sharp, being in the right places. Like, he's a very good football player, and that could just be what was asked of him, like that sort of style. And then you get to the NFL and you see a totally different side of someone. That could be the case because he has the route running to do a lot. It's just, yeah, I don't know. The film didn't match the hype for me because I saw a lot of what you were saying, and that's like when I saw that I was like, I see a very good player. I'm not acting like he's a bum by any means. He was my number 3. Like, I liked him, but I don't know. I couldn't shake the way other people felt about him, and I just didn't feel like the film matched. My number 1, I'll be quick because again, I agree with a lot, was Quentin Johnston. There came a point where his ceiling was the separator for me, because the 3 pretty immediately were Johnston, Addison, Njigba. So those were, and I'm sort of ordering them from there. I feel like he does have the highest floor out of all of them, and really the only guy in this draft that has the potential to be a number 1 receiver. I don't think that'll be right away, though. I don't think any of these guys are going to come in and have the sort of success that the last few drafts have had for receivers. But with his size, his route tree seems to be a little bit limited. That is what scared me. I did feel sort of Kevin White vibes, but just the physical talent is there. So like just from a physical standpoint, his ceiling, I think, was higher than everyone else's, especially in that top 3. But with that, his floor is lower because he doesn't have what Najiba has. He doesn't have what Addison has. But he has, I think, a potential, he has the potential to be unlocked to be higher than that. But again, you ordering them 3 in any which way, you wouldn't get much of an argument out of me. This was a tough receiver class to gauge, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say a lot tougher than last year, which is weird because the players were better last year, so there should have been kind of an easy kind of way to rank them. But yeah, they were all kind of closer together, I think. But yeah, just to go over Jordan Addison again, kind of a lot of what you talked about. I just think he's the best route runner. I think he's probably the best athlete. There's one negative. It's obviously his size. He doesn't seem to be super strong, but if he can get on the outside, he can also play on the inside, which I think versatility was another reason that I really like Jordan Addison. He allows you to do a lot with him in the offense, as opposed to more of your Quentin Johnston is going to be on the outside while Smith Najiba might just be in the slot. So, I appreciate a guy who's a little bit more versatile, I should say. And he catches everything. He fucking catches everything that you throw to him. He's going to fucking catch it, which obviously is good when you're talking about a wide receiver. Because we saw a lot of that with the Bears last year, where their one job, which is to catch the ball, and they couldn't fucking do it. So, yeah, I'll take the guy who can actually catch the football. Real quick, I think we can go over the tight ends.
Yep.
I only ranked 3, Frank. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I did too, and I think we ranked the same 3. Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I have 4. I have 4. Because there is one other guy that I did like. So give me your 1 through 3, and I'll give you a couple others after that as well.
I'm not even gonna lie to you, Jack. I really didn't rank them in order. These were the 3 that I think could be maybe day 1, but definitely day 2 guys. Michael Mayer, who reminded me a lot of Cole Kmet. Granted, they went to the same school. They may be just scouting tight ends to. Well,
that's Notre Dame for you. They love their tight ends.
Yeah, to sort of fit that mold. Dalton Kincaid, who I think, if we were ranking him as a receiver, he'd have been at 6. He didn't block very much. He didn't have very much blocking film on him. He more have had that he reminded me a lot of Mark Andrews actually. He had fun film. And then 3 for me, and it's honestly, it was more about the potential of what he could be. How can you ignore his size and just the athlete that he is? Was Darnell Washington. I think he has a pretty high floor because just with his size, he's going to be a good blocker on goal line situations, immediately coming in for short yardage situations, but even on 3rd and longs when you need an extra tackle out there, or just a quick block and slip out for a quick screen or something. That dude fucking crushed his pro day. His goddamn. Was it Sports Center or maybe it was on Twitter? They were showing some of the things that he was certain records he was breaking in different or not statistics, but workout things. And I know you don't want to fall too in love with that, but seeing that and knowing how bad the tight end position can be sometimes, you just have to take a shot on someone that physically gifted, right? You can't not. If he's in the 3rd round, even if you don't necessarily have a need at tight end, you have to sort of make it work with him or try to make it work with him.
Yeah, he literally just kind of reminds me of Jelani Woods, right? All over again. He's basically the same type of player. I think Jelani was probably a little bit better of a prospect, just overall.
Jelani gave me more of a former basketball player type of feel, super athletic. Darnell gives me a younger Mercedes Lewis type of feel, where it's he's just a big body. He didn't I didn't see too many of him getting up and getting the ball, crossing routes weren't really there. He had really good blocking highlights. I enjoyed that more than the receiving stuff from him. But then seeing what he can do athletically makes me think maybe they just didn't use him that way in college.
Yeah, I'm curious, man. Kind of takes us back to the days of the basketball tight ends. Remember that? Yeah. That was all the rage. But I'm just kind of was when I was taking a look at the tight ends, because for dynasty purposes, you never know. You just never know who's gonna pop up, when they're gonna pop up. Like Trey McBride obviously was by far and away the best, tight end to have. You had to draft him, you had to get him, and then he really didn't do a whole lot in his rookie season. But nobody was really worried because that was just sort of how things go. That's sort of just how it goes with tight ends. But yeah, Michael Mayer, player comps that I saw online and kind of agreed with some of them. Michael Mayer was compared to Jason Witten, which I was kind of like, after you see that, you kind of look for it. You're kind of like, yeah, okay. Dalton Kincaid was compared to Zach Ertz. And then the one that I really liked outside of the Darnell Washington as well was Luke Musgrave from Oregon State. He got a comp to Dallas Goedert. And once you kind of see those comps, like I was saying, once you see those comps and you start looking for it, you do kind of see a little athleticism. I think this might be one of the best tight end drafts we've had in quite some time. I'm going to be honest with you. 4 of these guys might be able to play a little bit here. And we get lucky if we get 2, in most drafts. So
yeah. No, that's very fair. But again, the thing with tight end is, especially you're talking dynasty, you draft guys to hold them. You're not drafting like the receivers usually, especially when you're drafting them in the first round of a dynasty draft. You want them to be day one contributors. If they're not, that's a disappointment at this point. I stack tight ends and hold them for 4 or 5 years if I can, unless there's salary cap issues and I got to let one go. But like, I do that nonstop. I just continue to do that, and I scout them and I, you sort of like some of them, but again, that doesn't always translate. Like they have the, outside of probably center and quarterback on offense, they have the most responsibilities. They have to block, almost like a tackle, and they have to receive almost like a receiver. That's a fucking tough job, man.
Right. Yeah, it really is. And some of these guys don't really block. They probably were playing a lot of wide receiver because their team's wide receivers probably weren't all that good. So just had to find ways to get them involved. But this should be an interesting draft. I'm curious if the Bulls, Jesus Christ, they're pissing me off already, Frank. I'm gonna be honest with you. I was watching on my phone a little, like watching the score a little bit, and they're just, they suck you in, and then they just play like shit, and it's same thing as it ever was. But anyways, I'm curious if the Bears end up with any of these skill position players. I could see a scenario where the Bears don't draft a single skill player. They might just be drafting offensive, defensive line. Like I said, I still think they need to get a wide receiver, preferably one of the top end guys. I would like that in maybe the second round with one of their second round picks. I know they've basically spent 2 second round picks now on guys, but it is what it is. You need as many weapons as you can get, especially in today's NFL, especially because you don't know what Chase Claypool will bring you. You don't know how Darnell Mooney's going to look this upcoming season. Got to keep adding. And I think they can to the tight end room as well, because they don't feel comfortable with Cole Kmet, and you can get one of these guys who you might be able to develop and build with. Be okay with that. I'd be okay with the Bears drafting Darnell Washington as just another weapon to have for Justin Fields. But I'm not dying for any of these wide receivers or running backs or tight ends.
Same. I mean, so I do think if they do draft a skill position player day 2, especially day 3, I think it will be a running back. But again, the one thing that I'm really looking for next year is, if Michael Mayer, if Dalton Kincaid, if these guys, Darnell Washington, if these guys, are players that you feel like can be another weapon. They constantly talk last year about versatility and about being open and like using players. Like, why wouldn't you have, Michael Mayer in the slot for a little while for half a game, or have Cole Kmet running the inside. Like, I would like to see a little bit. Granted, the skill positions. I'm not saying that as a negative. Like, that should have happened more last year. You were pretty handcuffed, if you're Luke Getsy and the offensive staff with what you really had. But I think that should inform the way that you draft as well. Like, if you look at someone just as an offensive weapon, and you have more of a loose philosophy of what you want to do on offense, you should be able to make things work with the super talented player. With the, so if they see someone like that, I want to see how, I want to see how they're going to make it work, because just like you said, the Bears need more weapons. Whether that means a wide receiver with straight line speed, whether it's another route runner, whether it's a tight end that can, run seam routes down the middle. Like, They need all of it still. The job is not finished building around Justin Fields, and the more weapons you can get him and the more creative that Luke Getsy can get as a play caller, not only does that help us this next year and it helps Justin his development, that gets you closer to a head coaching job. But what you did last year doesn't get that done.
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about. Again, I hate to keep going back to it, but eventually we'll get to that point where we can. But it kind of goes back to Matt Nagy and how he talked about in his second year how he really wanted to open up the playbook. We'll see if Luke Getsy can actually do that. Now that he has some more weapons to work with, now that he has guys that maybe fit his offense a little bit better, maybe he was trying to fit David Montgomery in where it didn't really make sense. Khalil Herbert maybe isn't going to be the running back one we thought he would be. A lot of people in the fantasy community think that he will be. We'll kind of see how they shape this offense to be a little bit more fitting to what they really want to do, as opposed to last year where it was, here are some guys, make it work best you can, and we'll see how it goes. That being said, Frank, I know it's early to say, but I just want to get to the, if they don't take a wide receiver this year, they'll be fine, because I'll just need them to tank again to get Marvin Harrison Jr. and everything will be right in the world. I need that to happen, Frank. I need the Bears to get Marvin Harrison Jr. That's my mission for next season. If they don't make the playoffs, they don't win the Super Bowl, getting Marvin Harrison Jr. probably the next best thing for me.
Well, there's the potential to do both.
There is the potential to do both.
I don't forecast the Panthers being very good next year.
I really hope not, Frank. We need that first round pick.
That would be, oh man, that would be great.
But we really appreciate you guys listening to the Bear With Us podcast. As always, it's draft month. It's April, so the draft will be here before you know it. We'll have some more to talk about. See if the Bears decide to make any moves. I don't know if it'll be anything big, but we'll keep an eye out, and we'll talk about it when we talk about it. Till then, talk to you guys later.
Later, Jackie. Later, everybody.